the same thing, like talking about wild oceans, but hey, I could never leave that behind, because we might have some people that are new here and would like to know about who Wild Oceans is. Well, Wild Oceans is a Wild Trust marine program which works at a space of an environmental conservation and advancing social economics. And talking about the Wild Oceans, it's got various programs, and projects rather. One of them is the MPA expansion project, which looks at expanding marine protection in South African waters. And I will also bring it to your attention that we have a very amazing youth-led movement, which is called the Youth for MPA, which is a group of young enthusiasts who are advocating for marine protection and promoting their benefits. And without them, we wouldn't be here today, because they're the ones who suggested all these topics that we've been dissecting all this time. And we will continue with these webinars, so it will be nice to see what other topics we are going to be talking about moving forward. So if you would like to be part of this youth movement, you're more than welcome to join the movement. So there will be a link that will be put up on our chat. So make sure that you are joining so that you can be the part of a bigger picture and do something good for the environment and also for yourself. Okay, without wasting any time, let me just get down to the business. So today's topic is a guide to MPAs around the world. So basically, we are going to be talking about different types of MPAs and how they add up to the global goal of ocean protection. And we are very much excited to have these wonderful ladies today who are here to make it possible. And that is Dr. Kirsten Grorud-Colvert. And just to give you a little bio on who she is a marine ecologist and at Oregon State University, where she has studied ocean places along the US West Coast and around the world. So you can imagine she's got a vast of experience. She uses data from different species and habitats to ask what happens when you protect an area in the ocean, and what can we learn from those areas to design even better protection. In addition to her research, she directs the Science of Marine Reserve project and co-leads the MPA Guide, which is shared science about the marine protected areas in collaboration with partners worldwide. Kirsten is also inspired by people's stories about why the ocean matters to them. She helps to achieve these with the Tales from the Sea storytelling project. So I can see that this is someone who works very closely as well with kids. I think we share the same passion there, Kirsten. And then moving along, we also have another amazing lady that will be presenting together with Kirsten today. And her name is Dr. Jenna Sullivan-Stack, who is a marine ecologist and a postdoctoral scholar at Oregon State University. She received her PhD in zoology studying intertidal communities. So if you've been to the intertidal zone, you know that you'll find all your mussels, all your hemicrabs there, but she mainly investigates how sea stars and their interactions with other species change with changing climate and an emerging infectious disease. Okay, so currently she co-leads the MPA Guide, a project which aims to bring clarity and transparency to the science, policy, and management of marine protected area. Jenna is passionate about engaging diverse groups with the process of science discovery and knowledge application. So I know it sounds like I've been preaching, so I think it will be nice to actually hear from the horse's mouth. And like I said, we're very much honored to have you ladies here. And I think I'm going to let you tell us about why you are here with us today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dudu. Thank you to you and Rachel and Bianca and all the Wild Oceans team for the invitation. I'd also like to thank two other members of our team that are here this morning. It's morning in Oregon. Laurel Field is on the line, and she's doing a master's with our research group at Oregon State University, and also Maddie MacArthur, who's doing an undergraduate thesis with us. So we're we're a team presence this morning, and what I'm going to be sharing is very much teamwork altogether. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you can see it okay. Yeah? Great. Okay, so as Dudu mentioned, we're going to give you kind of a high-level swoop over all the MPAs in the world a bit, and talk about how we are developing in partnership with a large group a single common language about how we talk about MPAs. So to start, like Dudu said, I'm a marine ecologist, a professor at Oregon State University. This is a picture from one of the marine reserves, an MPA here in Oregon that I study. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to visit MPAs around the world and to use data from those MPAs to get a sense of what it means to protect the ocean and how MPAs work as a tool. So today we're going to talk first of all about why we need ocean protection. That's something that I'm very passionate about. And not only kind of assessing the state of the ocean, but how we use science to do that, and how we can use science to get a sense of how MPAs are performing all around the world. We're going to talk about the MPA Guide, which you heard a little bit about in our bios. This is a large-scale collaboration that's bringing a clear way to talk about MPAs so that we can share this clear language with policymakers and others who are making decisions about how we're protecting the ocean. And then we're going to talk about how it's being applied, why many are finding it useful, and we hope how it will also be useful to your work with advocacy and your teams. Okay, so to start with, we're living in perilous times for the ocean, but we know that the ocean is a lifeline for us on this planet. It provides so many things that we rely on for our daily lives: food, oxygen, medicine, fuel. It helps to regulate our climate. It helps to regulate diseases and pests, and it also protects our coasts. So the ocean is not only the largest portion of our planet, but it is our lifeline for our survival. At the same time, it also provides things that we enjoy, like our cultural and spiritual experiences. So it's more than just the scientific cycles. It's more than just the nutrients and the food and the fuel, but it's also our personal and passionate connection to the ocean itself. But the ocean is also threatened by habitat loss, species exploitation, different uses of the ocean and overuse of the ocean are depleting and disrupting these ecosystems. And what that translates into is impacts for all of us: economic impacts, social impacts, environmental impacts that all threaten the benefits that we receive from a healthy and productive and protected ocean. We also know that climate change overlays everything that the ocean is dealing with right now. And because of that, these increasing temperatures, increasing levels of carbon dioxide, which our ocean sinks up and sucks up for us now that we're putting so much of that carbon dioxide into the ocean. We're having warmer waters, our storms are bigger, our natural disasters are more extreme. Here in Oregon, we just had one of the most extreme and destructive years of wildfire on record. And all of this plays into how the ocean is cycling and providing the things that we need. So we have a challenge in front of us. The ocean ecosystems are being depleted and disrupted, and that threatens not only us, but also the wildlife in these ecosystems. So the time for a change is now. And it sounds like many of you are already moving towards that change and that vibrant future. We know it's going to take a varied approach. We have to address climate change, pollution, and habitat destruction. We are going to continue to need food from the sea, but we need to make the extraction of that food and those resources sustainable. And the bottom line is we also need to have places in the ocean that are protected. These are areas where we set aside biodiversity and all the benefits it provides and use these as an insurance factor, since in many ways we don't know what the future is going to bring. And we need these parks in the sea as an insurance factor. We have multiple tools in the toolbox, and because of that, there are many people all over the world who are enacting these tools, who are working to learn more about these tools and how to make them better. Everything from reducing pollution, restoring destroyed habitats, working towards sustainable fisheries. All of these are needed and complementary. Today, we're going to focus on MPAs. And we always like to start off with a question about why MPAs matter, right? Countries all over the world have actually been making commitment to protect areas of the ocean in marine protected areas and other area-based tools. Countries have committed to protect 10% of the ocean by 2020. Well, looking at my watch, it is 2020 now, right? So how are we doing? How far have we got? Is a key question right now. Policymakers and people all over the world are asking. And then the second question is 10% enough even in the first place, whether we've gotten there or not? So it's really important to consider MPAs as a tool because countries and governments worldwide are using them. We like to start off with what is an MPA, because the definition is important, especially when we think about all the other tools out there. It's a clearly defined space in the water. It is that park in the sea. It's protected by legal or other effective means. So it's official. It's actually something that exists and can be defended or protected by law. The third one is also really key. The primary goal for an MPA is the conservation of nature. And that's kind of our way of distinguishing it from other tools. Other tools may prioritize fisheries, which is a very important goal, but MPAs are particularly about the conservation of nature and then all the benefits that conserved nature provides. So let's have a poll. I'm interested to know, how many of you have been to an MPA anywhere in the world? Yes, no, not sure? I'd love to hear where you're coming from. Can everyone see the results as they're coming up on the screen?
Yeah, coming through.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, good. So it looks like many people have been to an MPA somewhere in the world. Others have not, and some are unsure. And that's not unusual to be unsure. Sometimes you may have been to the ocean, and whether there was a clear sign telling you or not, you might have been near an MPA. Great, very helpful. So MPAs around the world are really diverse and spectacular places. They are in a number of habitats. They protect a number of species. And maybe, I'm having problems closing the poll. Do you mind closing it, Bianca, and I'll move on?
I thought I had. I think I might need to share the results before closing it, sorry.
Got it, no, that's great.
There we go.
There we go.
Let's see. That should have closed it now.
Now I can, great.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. So here's an MPA that is in South Africa. Many of you may have heard of it or know it well. This is Tsitsikamma Marine Protected Area, an MPA that's very close to my heart since I was able to visit there years ago and go on one of the best walks of my life along the marine protected area. But this is just one example of MPAs in South Africa, in Southern Africa, around the world. And scientists have been studying these MPAs. And in fact, some of them they've been studying for decades. And I bring up Tsitsikamma because it's also one of the oldest studied MPAs in the world. Established in 1984, it was studied very closely in the early days and provides some of the longest the longest data sets that we have worldwide about what happens when you protect an area in the ocean. So considering all those scientists have been collecting all those data for decades, what have we learned? Those scientific conclusions from all those studies have been published in hundreds of reports and journal articles around the world. As Dudu mentioned, I also direct the Science of Marine Reserves project, and that project's goal is to take all that science that sometimes gets buried in reports or in journals behind paywalls on the web, and pulls it all together and puts it into a format that anyone can read. It's not wordy, it's not super complicated diagrams, it's just the summary of the science that, for example, could be shared with decision makers who just want to ask, what does an MPA do? So what we've learned from that is that fully protected MPAs, these are areas that are no take, no extractive or destructive activities, tend to have really consistent responses worldwide. When MPAs are fully protected, they protect biodiversity, all the species and habitats. Because they protect that biodiversity, some of that tends to also spill over. And so they also tend to enhance fisheries in the areas outside where fishing is allowed. They protect ecological balance because not only are they protecting a single species at a single point in time, but they're protecting all the species in the ecosystem. And because of that, all the natural interactions between species are preserved. They can buffer against mistakes and uncertainty, and that's that insurance factor. We don't know what the future will hold, but we do know that ecological balance leads to better resilience and better able to withstand some of the challenges that are coming in the future. They provide reference areas because there's no fishing or mining or dredging. We can really look at these areas and say, okay, if we don't do those things, what does an ecosystem look like? And they're a really key way to protect culturally and spiritually important species and activities. They also can help to mitigate climate change because they're protecting stores of carbon that won't be disturbed by dragging nets or removing mangroves, for example. And they're really an important part of kind of the climate solution moving forward. So we know quite a lot about fully protected MPAs. And we know this for a range of different species, whether they be hammerhead sharks that travel large distances. If you protect key parts of areas they need to spawn or to raise their young, then they can be MPAs can be really key for protecting that species. But also species that spend more time on the bottom in smaller areas, like lobsters or various kinds of fishes. Species all around the world, habitats all around the world, MPAs really do cover a diversity of different areas in the ocean. And it's really powerful to see that the responses are really similar, even across all these diverse places. So we know a lot about MPAs. We know countries are making commitments towards them. Now's the time where we ask the big questions. How much of the ocean is actually protected right now? And of that protection, how much is effective? How do we know that it's more than just lines on the map, that these areas are actually achieving their goals of conserving biodiversity? And then for all these MPAs around the world, what can you expect to happen in your neighborhood, in your country, in your habitats that you know well? What outcomes might MPAs provide? And then there's the bigger question of, now that international leaders are setting the new targets as this year ticks by, this very crazy year, right? What's going to happen in the future? What do we need to look ahead and say, we want to be proactive, we want to plan, and we want to make sure that we're protecting enough of the ocean. So that brings us to the MPA guide, which we're sharing with you today as part of a large group of partners that are shown with their logos here. I also want to acknowledge Jane Lubchenko, who is our close collaborator and colleague on this. as well as all the partner organizations that are kind of the founding members of the MPA Guide. The goal of the MPA Guide was to bring together the community of marine scientists, marine conservation professionals, marine specialists like those at Wild Oceans, and have a conversation. What do we still need to know about MPAs? What do we know about MPAs, but we're not saying very clearly? And that's what the MPA Guide is and what we'll be sharing with you today. So we developed the MPA Guide because we wanted to help with a clear and transparent way to talk about MPAs. MPA, it turns out, is a catch-all term. There are all kinds of different kinds of MPAs. Some of them protect really strongly. Some of them only, regulate a few activities. So MPAs are very different in their approaches, and you would assume in the outcomes that come from them. And then the MPA Guide is also in service to answering the questions about what kind of ocean protection is needed. So it's a language for the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenna, and she's going to introduce you to the MPA Guide.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'll share my screen. Okay, so as Dudu said in the beginning, I am Jenna Sullivan-Stack. I also am at Oregon State University, and I study the creatures that live in intertidal habitats. This is our local MPA. It's called Strawberry Hill on the Oregon coast, and you can see people dotted around doing research, counting mussels and sea stars, and trying to figure out exactly what they're up to and how their interactions are changing with changing climate. So this is where I spend my time when I'm doing science in the field, which is great. Usually it's raining, and sometimes there are rainbows here in Oregon, but I'm also working on the MPA Guide. So I'm going to talk to you about how the MPA Guide works, and then why we think it's useful to people, hopefully including yourselves, who are interested in having really good protection of the ocean. So this process began more than 2 years ago, but really it's been brewing in the minds of mostly Kirsten and Jane, my two main collaborators, for a really long time. How can we make marine protection more useful? And there's a lot of confusion, like what Kirsten has been talking about, so how can we resolve that confusion? So about 3 years ago, we led our first meeting, and we're bringing together people from all different areas of focus, scientists who are working on the effects that MPAs can bring to both species that live there and also the humans that depend on the MPAs, people who work mostly in policy, governments, people who are community members that really have a deep understanding of a local MPA. And these pictures across the bottom are just some of the groups that we have convened to talk about this and gather ideas. And we're going to be presenting or publishing a paper coming up with a lot of different authors from all over the world, including one from South Africa. And it's going to be going through the peer review process in science, which can take a long time, but when it's ready, I'm sure we can share with you guys if you want to read it. One of the really key voices that we wanted to make sure that we're incorporating into the MPA Guide is the information that is known by those who are traditional and local users of MPAs. So not necessarily having to be a scientist who's been trained at a fancy university to do particular methods to learn about the ocean. There are people that live and breathe MPAs in their daily lives all the time, and that's a really important source of information for us. So we wanted to make sure that we can draw upon that wealth of knowledge in making our guide. So as I was just mentioning, we benefit from and also reflect a wide range of voices. And then the partners across the bottom are the ones that really are the owners of this guide. But hopefully it's useful for people all over the world. Okay, so I've got one more poll just to see what you guys think. How much do you think of the ocean as protected in MPAs? So this map here is just an artist's rendering of MPAs with a really great artist we work with. The blue spots are meant to be MPAs. But do you think that there's less than 1% of the ocean in any type of MPA, around 5%, around 7%, or around 30%?
Okay, answers are coming in.
Yep, you guys are great. It's confusing is the answer. So we know it's not a lot. It could be more. And it's a hard question because it depends on what you talk about as an MPA, which is exactly why we made this MPA guide. So the answer actually also depends on who you ask. So the World Database on Protected Areas, which is the official record keeper of MPAs, where countries report their MPAs directly to them, they say it's somewhere around 7%. But the watchdog organization at Marine Conservation Institute says it's more like 5% if they're actually counting MPAs that are actually on the water. And then if you only think about MPAs that are fully or highly protected, which we'll get into soon, those that are probably actually providing the most benefits of biodiversity, that's only around 2.6%. So even less than that 5%. So that's great.
Do you want to share the results?
Sure.
Good.
Okay. Perfect. You guys are a well-informed audience. Well-informed and also right on par with everyone, not quite sure exactly what the percentage is. And it's changing all the time. Okay, so there are, I can get into the specifics of the MPA guide now. There's 4 elements. And like Kirsten said, it's just a way to be more clear about MPA effectiveness. And a lot of time we talk about quantity, like with those percentage targets, but we also need to talk about quality and what the MPAs are actually doing to achieve their goals. So the first part of the MPA guide is the stage of establishment. The next part is the level of protection. And then there are enabling conditions that are fundamental in place for an effective MPA, and I'll go through what some of those are. And then finally, it's really important to know the outcomes that can be expected out of an MPA based on level of protection, and that draws on some of the science and community experiences like Kirsten was talking about. So starting with the stage of establishment, the first stage of establishment is proposed or committed, and this is when, for example, a world leader or a country leader or some other authority stands up and says, we want to make an MPA. It can be at a conference or online, but it's a non-binding announcement. Next is designated, and this is where an MPA is actually established in law or some other authoritative rule, and it has to have defined boundaries at this point. We have to know exactly where the MPA should be going, and it has some sort of legal basis. And up until this point, nothing is actually necessarily changing on the water. So the first time biodiversity, like a fish swimming around might know, if fish could know, that an MPA is actually there, would be when it's implemented. So this is when biodiversity conservation can actually start. And this is when there is a plan for regulating activities, like a management plan. There are people that are tasked with enforcing the MPA, and that people know that the MPA is there. And the last stage of establishment is actively managed. This is sort of the gold standard for MPAs. It's when management of the area is ongoing with periodic review and changes made. So we know we want this out of our MPA, and we're going to actually check and see if it's happening and then change things if it isn't, to make sure that, that we're achieving our goals. So that's what everyone is working towards. The most effective MPAs are actively managed. Okay, I know I'm running over on time, so I'll go kind of fast. The level of protection is so we have level of protection spans 4 different levels, and it's sort of a gradient of more and more use of the marine protected area. So starting with minimally protected, there may be a lot of extraction happening, not really destructive things like oil and gas mining, but maybe there's a lot of fishing happening, for example, that can be destructive, but there is still some conservation benefit. Lightly protected has a little bit more protections in place, but there are still a lot of uses of that area of ocean and a lot of relatively significant impacts. Highly and fully protected are the levels of protection that are best for biodiversity conservation. So this is when only really light extractive activities are allowed in a highly protected area, and we're trying to minimize all of the impacts that we can. And then a fully protected area has no fishing, no destructive activities, no mining. Maybe there's tourists are allowed to go in, or you know, people are allowed to visit the MPA, but you're not allowed to take anything from it. Okay, so this is how we decide, using the MPA guide, what level of protection your MPA may be. So this is a decision tree, and we break the activities that may be happening inside an MPA into 7 categories. So you can start at the beginning and work through the tree answering questions to figure out what bin at the end your MPA sits in. So is mining, mineral, oil, and/or gas prospecting or exploitation allowed? Yes, then it's incompatible with conservation of nature. So you end up in this gray bin. If it isn't, you get to go to the next question. Are dredging and dumping allowed? And then that sort of spits you into a couple different directions. And if you say no, you can keep going down and talk about anchoring, infrastructure, fishing, aquaculture, and then other non-extractive activities to figure out which bin you fall in. So this is a really detailed decision tree with a lot of information. And we haven't quite published it yet, but it's going to be a work in progress. So we're going to be learning from a lot of different people around the world about what activities are coming up in their MPAs and how they affect the conservation of that area, and try and figure out which bin it should go in. So this is sort of the behind the scenes of the MPA guide. Okay, so just to summarize, we have these 4 stages of establishment: proposed, committed, designated, implemented, and actively managed, which is sort of the gold star for achieving your goals. And then these 4 levels of protection: fully, with no extractive or destructive activities, all the way down to minimally with a lot happening, but there's still conservation in the area. Okay, so we talked about those 2, and then next are the enabling conditions and then the outcomes. So for enabling conditions, if we visualize the stages of establishment as sort of these gears turning towards effective MPA conservation, the enabling conditions are the things that are making those gears turn. So this is inclusive, transparent, evidence-based design, management, and government of MPAs, and that allows the MPA to be effective and equitable. And I can give you some examples on the next screen. And I guess I was just going to remind people, when there's this little don't tweet symbol, that's just because we haven't published the paper yet. So if you could not share these graphics quite yet, we'll be able to share them soon once we publish the paper. Okay, so enabling conditions. These are the things like partnering with local communities, indigenous communities, local rights and holders and other stakeholders that are so important for the effectiveness of an MPA. If you don't have their partnership, and if they aren't interested and don't think it's valuable to them, then there's no reason why they would help the MPA be a success. Inclusive, equitable, and evidence-based decision-making that's based on clear goals. That is an enabling condition that's a prerequisite. And I guess a lot of these are even beyond MPAs in general. These are just good practice to get things done. An MPA needs to have long-term financial support. There's a lot of research that shows that, you know, if you could have all the best intentions and put an MPA in and be very clear about everything you want to happen and design it well, but if you don't actually put money towards making sure that it functions, then it won't be able to. Having the political commitment that's long-term, and actually monitoring to make sure things are, your management is achieving your goals. And then collaboration, transparency, communication, and accountability. These are all enabling conditions for effective MPAs. Okay, finally, one of the most important pieces is the outcomes. So outcomes are linked directly to the level of protection, the stages, and the enabling conditions. So this guide clarifies what can be expected out of the different types of MPAs that you have. So for ecological outcomes, you can have different biodiversity conservation outcomes, different fisheries yields, so more or less fish available for people in the area to catch. You can have improved water quality, for example, with more filter feeders in the area that are taking pollutants or toxins out of the water, less algal blooms, for example. And then, like Kirsten was talking about before, we can actually have MPAs play a role in helping with climate resilience and storing carbon when, for example, kelp or other marine plants might suck carbon out of the water and store it. That is an outcome. And then there's also outcomes for human well-being, and these can span a lot of different aspects of human well-being as well. There can be changes to income, fishers that use the area or get to benefit from spillover of fish outside of the area. Maybe there are alternate livelihoods that are now available to people. Maybe tourists are coming more because there's an MPA there. You can have less tangible things like empowerment of stakeholders when you work from the very beginning with people in the area to help design an MPA that works for them. Then you can have empowerment outcomes happening and important positive outcomes usually for culturally important species that maybe needed that conservation benefit from the MPA. Okay, I'm going to zoom through this so we have just a minute for questions. So why many are finding it so useful? So as Kirsten was saying, and we've been trying, we're hoping that you agree, the MPA guide helps everyone speak the same language about MPAs. So we have a lot of different terms. People talk about no-take areas or strongly protected areas, but if everyone is talking about a fully protected area, then we all know what they mean. And we know that words are important so that everyone knows, everyone's speaking the same language and knows what the other one is saying. And this also helps translate these percentage targets into actual real world protection. So this 10% of the ocean target doesn't really mean anything if those are all proposed or designated, but not committed MPAs, for example. And communities, this matters to communities. People rely on the ocean. It's important for their well-being and their just food, for example. So this is just the stakes are really high. And we can also use the MPA guide to help with adding future MPAs. If you know what you want out of an MPA, then you can use the guide to figure out exactly which type of MPA you should be doing. Is it a lightly protected area or is it a fully protected area? And the more fully protected, so that's that level of protection, and actively managed, the stage of establishment an area is, the better the conservation outcomes. Okay, so we're envisioning a better future. That's something I spent a lot of time doing this year. And for the MPAs, the future that we're envisioning is a clear understanding of how much of the ocean is effectively protected so that we can know how much is needed. An accounting of what protection exists in the different types of MPAs. So even if we get to this 10% target, how much of that is in fully protected versus lightly or minimally protected. And then having a common language that will help design new MPAs that are actually working to achieve the goals of the people that depend on them. Okay, so this is what we covered today. We have the stages, levels, enabling conditions, and outcomes of the MPA guide. Hopefully it's useful to you guys as you're communicating to people in your world, either policymakers or other youth, how an MPA can be used and how we can talk about them in the most clear way possible. And we have some more tools available for you we could share. There is this graphic guide. It's a comic book style guide to protected areas, and it talks about some of the science and also talks through the different aspects of the MPA guide, and it can be helpful. And then we have this for policymakers summary called the Introduction to the MPA guide. And that's it. So thank you guys so much for joining, and I will turn it back over to Dudu.
In actual fact, I should be saying no thank you to you ladies for today. What an inspiring presentation. But most of it all, I think I like the fact that you've taken us through your MPA guide and the fact that you are also considering the traditional knowledge that is there, because most of the books, they just use the scientific aspect of findings and they totally ignore what's out there and what people have been doing for decades, So thank you for taking us through that. And it is interesting. I'm sure some of the youth here are saying, but we would also like to be part of that, to give us suggestions as well to that MPA guide. And I hope you ladies won't mind us keeping in contact with you regarding that. And I did notice we did have some numerous questions, but unfortunately, because of time, maybe we can take one, hey? Is that okay with you? And yes. I hope it's okay with everyone here. There's one that actually stood out for me and it kind of like made me laugh. So this guy called the Aussie persona said, but you didn't put confusing as a possible option in your poll. So that is something to consider maybe next time.
Absolutely.
Sorry?
Great idea.
Okay, so let me just take Heidi Dinant. She said there is a huge concern in South Africa regarding the application by oil and gas companies for exploratory projects for the extraction of gas and oil, drilling offshore and fracking on land. With potentially catastrophic effect, how can we tap into the global restrictions protecting MPAs to prevent environmental damage by these companies?
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Heidi. And this is obviously a severe issue that was on our minds as well when we were developing the MPA guide, not just because we hear the stories, including from South Africa, about this issue, but also because it comes up in multiple conversations worldwide about what should be allowed in an MPA. So you saw in the decision tree that Jenna presented very clearly at the top, it talks about mining, dredging as being incompatible with the conservation of nature. Up until this point, all that information is buried, right? It's in reports, it's in papers, but the MPA guide's goal is to make that front and center very clear. There are some activities that are not compatible with the conservation of nature, and oil and gas, dredging, exploration fits into that.
I think Dudu might be frozen, but thanks for that question, Heidi. Yeah, and I know it's really close on the mind of those in South Africa, and also, yeah, even here in the States, obviously also. We have a lot of change happening and are a little concerned about what that means for our own marine resources and areas. And yeah, I think it's gonna be up to clear communication from not only scientists, but just general people that think the ocean is important, to really clearly say this is not compatible with what we want out of our ocean resources. So hopefully the MPA guide can be helpful to that. We can't tell a country that what they have is not an MPA, but we can certainly clearly as possible explain that they're not going to get the outcomes they want if they allow this type of thing to happen. So.
Yeah, and thanks for the comment about confusing too. We can imagine if that confusion exists, imagine how confused policymakers, for example, are when people come with recommendations from here and there. So I hope that now, moving forward with this common language about MPAs and our shared goal of protecting the ocean, we can combat that confusion. So thanks to all of you for being here today and for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me just jump in, Shem. I think Dudu's lost connection, so I'll just jump in quickly. I just want to say thank you so much, Jenna and Kirsten. This is absolutely amazing. I think it's just been such a great progression as the webinar series has gone to get this sort of impact in interesting detail into the MPA guide. So really thank you so much for your time. I know the youth are going to definitely reach out to try and get those resources, so we'll share that with everyone. We'll also send you the questions so that you could please answer it, and we'll make these recordings available to anyone that wasn't able to attend today. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And just before everyone goes, I just want to remind you to please tune in next week. Next week's speaker is Nonhle Mqadi. She's from Izimvelo Wildlife Conservation Trust in Izimvelo, and she's going to be diving and unpacking a little bit more around the community aspects of MPAs in South Africa. So yeah, please do join in. And for everyone taking the long weekend, I hope you have a wonderful Heritage Day, and thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to put the slide up really fast again. Sorry, somebody was saying it was shown too briefly. This is our information. I should have had it up during the questions, but all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bianca, are we able to just maybe remove everybody?
I can, yeah.
Thanks. Sorry for anyone that's still here. I was hoping Jenna and Kirsten would stay, but I think we've lost them. So I think we can all just log off. Thanks so much, Bianca.
I can stop. No worries. Stop the recording.